This is a big year for Genesis. 2025 marks the introduction of the GV80 Coupe, the brand's answer to models like the BMW X6 and the Mercedes-Benz GLE Coupe. But there wouldn't be a GV80 Coupe without the GV80, the brand's first SUV. It was introduced in the summer of 2020 as a 2021 model. I had a chance to drive one of those first-year GV80s, and I fell in love with its distinctive exterior and luxurious interior. 2025 brings a mid-cycle refresh that includes several exterior and interior updates. Just what exactly are those? And is the new GV80 just as charming as the old one? Keep watching to find out. The GV80 only led to more SUVs for Genesis. Its portfolio now includes the GV60 electric vehicle, the GV70 ICE and EV models, and of course the upcoming GV80 Coupe. The GV80 only led to more Genesis SUVs. Its portfolio now includes the GV60 EV, GV70 ICE and EV models, and the GV80 Coupe. To keep the GV80 fresh, Genesis revised the front and rear ends, redesigned the wheels, and installed cutting-edge headlights. Inside, the 2025 GV80 comes with a different steering wheel, a massive new instrument and infotainment display, and a reconfigured center stack. One thing Genesis hasn't changed is the engine lineup. The GV80 goes forward with its turbocharged 2.5-liter four-cylinder and twin-turbo 3.5-liter V6 engines, both of which are paired with all-wheel drive and an 8-speed automatic. According to the Genesis website, pricing for the base 2.5T model starts at $58,200. The 3.5T range includes two trim levels: Advanced, which has an MSRP of $74,300, and Prestige, which goes for $79,800. My 3.5T Prestige Media Loaner has the optional $650 Uyuni white paint, which brings its as-tested price to $81,300. At first glance, you might not be able to spot the differences between the 2025 GV80 and the outgoing model. That's because they're pretty subtle, but they're there if you look hard enough. They're not as obvious as the ones on the inside, which I'll get to later. So down here, you have this skid plate-like trim, which makes the exterior more dynamic and adds a little bright work, but it's kind of an odd choice because skid plates are often associated with off-road vehicles. And even though this has all-wheel drive and a locking center differential, this is not an off-road vehicle. It's definitely not a Wrangler. So while it does add a little brightness to the exterior, it's kind of an odd choice. It's like pairing a wallet chain with a pinstripe suit. Further up, you have these larger air intakes. Genesis also revised the crest grille, so it has softer corners, and then it has this two-line pattern fill to it. Above that, just like on the G70 that I reviewed for this channel, you have this new guilloche badge. Keeping with the two-line theme, of course, are the headlights, which have always had the two-line design, but this year they get an update in terms of technology. Genesis integrated what's called MLA, a micro lens array, to the headlight. So basically, it's a compact housing that is able to project a tightly focused beam onto the road. I can imagine this is going to influence the way car designers design the front of vehicles in the future. Also, keeping with the two-line theme are these 22-inch wheels on my tester. As you can see, they've got a very pronounced parallel line design to them. And then there's even more on the front fenders. So the turn signal repeaters are integrated below this bright work right here. Of course, there's new chrome trim to further differentiate this, albeit in a subtle way, from the model that it replaces. I also want to point out the door handles. Now, they look nice enough, but it's what they're attached to that's special to me. So you open them up just like any other door, but this being a luxury vehicle, you don't even have to close them all the way. You just bring them to, and the soft close function does the rest. Now, there is one special thing about these, actually. This rectangular indentation up here. So if you have the key fob in your pocket and you're next to the door, you can, reach in, unlock the door. And if you want to lock it, you just press your thumb or your finger here. It senses the key fob and then it locks the door. That's pretty standard for keyless entry vehicles these days. Typically, it's found on the front row, but there are some vehicles that have it on the rear doors, and luckily the GV80 is one of those. This has come in handy while my wife and I move into our new house, because if I for some reason have one of my arms full or I need to unlock the door or lock it, I don't have to go up here to do it. If there's something I need to do back here, I can unlock or lock the door. It saves me that little bit of distance, and it's not the biggest deal in the world, but when you're in a hurry and you've got stuff to do and you've got things in your arms, it does make a difference. So I definitely appreciate that. As I said before, the exterior changes to the GV80 for 2025 are on the subtle side, but there is one that stands out just a little bit more than the others, and that's what's back here, or rather what's not back here. The previous GV80 had these crest grill shaped dual exhaust outlets, but as you can tell, they're no longer here. The pipes are concealed behind this lower bumper trim, and as you can tell, the brightwork here echoes that same basic shape. While I'm back here, I thought I would show you what's inside the cargo area and how to get into it. Now, it's a pretty basic concept, but it's a little tricky if you're not used to how they do things on the GV80. Now, I'd been in one before, but it'd been a while. It's been, 3.5 years, so I'd forgotten how you actually open this one-piece hatch. I thought, well, does one of the letters double as the release for it, or did they integrate it into the taillight somewhere, like a little button, or is it above the license plate frame, the way it is in a late model Mustang? It wasn't in any of those places. Genesis actually engraved the little icon below the wiper arm back here, but given that it's a relatively unusual place for that, it didn't occur to me to check that area first. So I'll give it a nice long press. And in the second row, you got the split bench there. And if you want to use this as a utility vehicle, like I did during our move, all you have to do to lower the seats is press a button. They power lower. Now I'm going to stop their travel just so I can show you that they can be power raised as well. Then behind those you have this cargo area cover, which came in handy this morning because I had my briefcase in the car and I was at a place that I'm not normally at and I didn't want to leave it exposed, so I just threw my briefcase back here, slid this cover into place, and prying eyes couldn't see it. Another nice thing back here is you see even more of the microfiber wrap that Genesis used for the headliner and all of the pillar wrap. And then you get these Bang & Olufsen speaker grills, so that's just a nice combination. Just seeing this material, those metallic speaker grills, they really fit a vehicle of this positioning and this price. And then down here under this carpeted cover, you have this lid and a small depression for holding small items, and then you've got your jack. And then I use this area to store the cargo net, which came in handy in a somewhat unconventional way during our move. Now let's move forward into the rest of the interior, and I'll show you the updates that Genesis made to the GV80. The interior updates to the 2025 GV80 are much easier to spot than they are on the outside. For starters, you get a new steering wheel. And this is a more traditional 3-spoke design, or technically a 4-spoke design, instead of the outgoing, unusual 2-spoke layout. And as you can tell, this has a 2-tone finish to it. That's because this is a Prestige model. So one of the good things about stepping up from Advanced to Prestige is you get the option of this attractive and, dare I say, Bentley-esque 2-tone interior, which in this case is ultramarine blue and glacier white. And that's accented with this matte finish wood trim, which I think makes the interior a little more dynamic, and it coordinates nicely with the glacier white surfaces around the cabin. Then behind that is what I would say is the most significant change to the GV80, which is the combining of the main gauges and the infotainment display. So it's all one massive 27-inch OLED panel. And it's slick and it's techy, but I have certain issues with it, which I'll get into in the driving section later on. Further down, you have these revised controls and center stack, so you now get these volume and tuning knobs, which I'm a big fan of. You also get these dials for the 2 front climate control zones. There's a third in the rear. In between those is another issue that I have with this vehicle, and this is not just specific to the new GV80. Other vehicles do this, and I'm never a really big fan of when automakers go for these touch controls for the HVAC system. You know, if I'm on the road and I want to adjust something, buttons allow me to use a sort of sense memory to make adjustments on the fly. You know, I can just reach out to the general area, and then I can tell by what I'm touching what I'm going to adjust, and I can just do it quickly. You know, it's almost effortless. But with this, since there's no tactile sensation, I have to take my eyes off the road, I have to look down and deliberately press whatever control that I want to adjust. And I have to be careful with how I press it, because if I give it a glancing blow, that might not engage it. So yes, this does look slick. It's got that clean look to it, especially when there aren't fingerprints on it, but I'm just not a big fan of it for a couple of reasons. And below that, you have some more of this attractive wood trim on this panel that covers your various charging options. One of those is a redesigned wireless charging pad, and as you're charging, these LEDs light up in green to let you know that it is actively charging. This area is similar to how it was before. Of course, you don't have the thumb wheels for the volume and tuning, but the big change is this rotary dial for the shifter. Before, it had this knurled finish on the outside, but for 2025, Genesis went with this crystal-like material, which I think is attractive and makes the interior a little more dynamic. Earlier, I had mentioned that my test vehicle is a Prestige model. That's the top of the line for the 3.5T lineup. Moving from the Advanced, which is the base model this year for the 3.5T, to the Prestige gets you the 22s on the outside, Nappa leather seating, and a heated and ventilated second row. Now you might be asking, well, what about the third row? The Advanced model gets one. Yeah, you don't get a third row in the Prestige at all. It's heated and ventilated in the second row, and then behind that, it's just open space. That hasn't been an issue for me, because while I've had the GV80, I've had family in from out of town, but I've also been moving into a new house with my wife. So I've been able to use this vehicle in both ways. So my family members have enjoyed the second row, not only because it's heated and ventilated, but they get their own climate zone, and then they have a fixed moonroof above them. So that's been a hit with the ladies at the house. But I've also used this as a utility vehicle. Believe it or not, it is a fancy $81,000 luxury SUV, but I have been using it as a utility vehicle. To maximize the amount of space that I have in the back, all I have to do to lower the second row is press a button on the base of the outboard seats or a button in the rear cargo area, and that frees up 71.7 cubic feet of space. The beauty of that is I've been able to carry chairs, clothing, boxes, and I haven't had to worry about stacking them too high and obstructing my rear view, because I have this handy rear mirror camera up front here. So that sees out the back for me, lets me know what's behind me. The only thing I have to worry about is, making sure I position things so that, the leg of a chair doesn't bash out the rear window. There are a few other perks to being in the second row as well. So right here you have these power rear sunshades. So you just raise them and lower them with the window controls, and then you use the switch again to actually raise and lower the windows themselves. Up top here is this nice microfiber headliner all over everything, the pillars, the headliner, and these little vanity mirrors, which were a hit with the ladies in my family when we were going out for dinner. There's also these carve outs in the backs of the front seats, so you get a little more leg room than you would otherwise have. And as you can tell, I have a decent amount of leg room back here. There will be more here in a second. And that's allowed me to sit behind myself, so to speak, in the front row. In the middle, you have a pair of HVAC vents and the controls for the third climate zone, as well as for the heated and ventilated seats. Down at the bottom, you have some charging options, USB and a wall plug as well, if you have something that needs a little bit more juice. To maximize comfort here, you can use the power controls to power slide the seat forward or backward. So this is the maximum amount of leg room that I get. Then I can also tilt the seat forward and back just to lounge a little bit more. And if we happen to have a drink or something like that, you can just lower this rear armrest, get a pair of cup holders and a storage compartment as well. And then if for some reason you need to move this front passenger seat from the driver's seat or back here, let's say the front passenger leaves and you need a little bit more room, you can actually use this control on the inboard side of the front passenger seat to move the seat forward and even tilt it forward. Just as before, the GV80's base engine is a 2.5-liter turbo 4 that generates 300 horsepower and 311 pound-feet of torque. My test vehicle here is a 3.5T Prestige, which means it gets the available 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6. That's good for 375 horsepower and 391 pound-feet of torque. No matter which engine you choose, that's paired with an 8-speed automatic and all-wheel drive. According to the window sticker for my press car, it can get 16 miles per gallon in the city, 22 on the highway, and 19 combined. It's been pretty accurate. I've averaged just under 20 miles per gallon. On the outside, the GV80 definitely has a presence. It's a relatively large vehicle, but on the inside, it feels smaller. It feels more manageable. So it's not intimidating to drive. You don't feel like the extremities are beyond your reach or beyond your cognition, you know? It's manageable to drive. It's also pretty quiet. And then the electronically controlled suspension does a good job of smoothing out the road ahead. It uses the front camera to read the surface of the road before you get to it, and then it adjusts the suspension accordingly. So, you know, that way potholes and bumps in the road aren't jarring. And overall, it does a great job. You know, it hasn't been rough or, you know, uncomfortable or anything. Although I will say there have been occasions in which I've become aware of just how big and heavy those 22-inch wheels are. Aside from that, yeah, it does a nice job of soaking up bumps and imperfections in the road. The engine also has plenty of power as well. It may be carryover, but I think Genesis got it right from the start. You know, the twin turbo V6 has got plenty of power. It's a little sleepy down low when you're first starting out, but when you get into it, like I'm gonna do right now, you put your foot down, comes online, you get that squat. I mean, it's definitely got plenty of pull. So during the move that my wife and I have been making, I've been getting a lot of use out of the wireless Apple CarPlay and Apple Maps. And I've had a variety of views of the route that I take to, you know, a new destination. So in the head-up display, I can see the next turn. And then in the main gauge display, you know, I've got obviously the speed and the tach and trip computer, but also the way I have it set up right now, I see the maps. And that gives me a view of the chunk of the leg of my journey that I'm in. And then on the main infotainment display, I can see a macro view of my entire route from start to finish. Now, obviously you can adjust these readouts and views, but that has been a very comprehensive look at where I'm going. That brings me to an issue that I have with this impressively sized OLED display. It's 27 inches, so yeah, you know, big panel and big screens are in these days. And I get it, you know, it's techy, it's modern, it's flashy. My problem with this though, and I had the same issue with the Hyundai Ioniq 6, is yes, they're all on the same plane, the gauges and the infotainment display. But even though I have the steering column and my seat adjusted to my preferences and my dimensions, to use the infotainment display as a touchscreen, which you can, I have to lean forward, not just lean forward, but also extend my arm and reach to input any commands. It's not quick, it's not natural, it requires a small amount of labor, but an amount of labor nonetheless. And I would rather Genesis have made this, if they're gonna put it that far away, just make it a display only. So then that wouldn't even be an issue. It doesn't matter how far away it is, all you can do is look at it. But the fact is, they have this there as perhaps a secondary system to the puck down here. And if you're going to make it usable as a touchscreen, it makes the most sense to me to make it immediately accessible, So this almost in a way kind of pushes you to use the puck as a default. And yes, you can use it, but to me, it's just quicker and easier and more natural to use the infotainment display as a touchscreen, because I don't have to take my eyes off the road. It's near my line of sight. Whereas if I'm using the puck, there's that disconnect there. So yes, it is techy and modern, and it has a certain slickness to it, but I don't like the fact that it is so far out of reach to use as a touchscreen. I've shown you the ways in which the GV80 is new for 2025, inside and out. It has a restyled exterior, futuristic headlights, and a restyled interior with flashy tech. But is it new and improved? I would say yes. True, I'm not crazy about the OLED display, and touch controls for the HVAC system will never make sense to me. But everything around that looks good and works well, whether you want to haul your family in luxury or use the GV80 as a utility vehicle. As I've said before, this is just my opinion on this particular vehicle, so if you want to find out if the 2025 GV80 meets your needs and wants, go to your local Genesis dealer and take one for a test drive.